Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Okay, I'm going to also read what I wrote here about Richard. So, it was about 7 months ago when I was on a little vacation in Big Sur with a small collection of books at my side. At the top of the stack was the Mud Club book by Richard Boch. From the moment I began reading, I started to recall countless long-forgotten moments of my past, the old friends and great memories of a very poignant and creatively rich time in New York City. Richard's expression and illustration of his feelings as a young person and artist escaping into the nightlife of New York City during the late 70s and early 80s was profoundly moving. In fact, I was so moved that I posted a picture of the book on Instagram and a little anecdote about my experience at the Mud Club as a 16-year-old kid. Although I never knew Richard in 1980, after finishing the book, I felt a very strong connection to him. There we were 38 years later, connected through Instagram and 3,000 miles apart, exchanging stories of our personal experiences and learning just how parallel our identities and social lives were during these days. It wasn't long after that I returned to New York from Big Sur before Richard and I were sat at a dinner table waxing for hours over familiar stories from a youth spent in the late hours of dimly lit clubs in New York City. For me, this book is more than just an incredibly well-told story of a place and time. It's Richard's genuine and sincere human story that does not shy away from true expression of his feelings and insecurities. I'm very honored to introduce you to the legendary doorman, artist, author, and my good friend, Richard Boch.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Is the sound coming through okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks, Marc, for that lovely introduction. I started writing this book 8 years ago in the spring of 2010. The book came out last September. I've done a lot of readings in New York, and I'd like to thank a lot of you again for supporting this book and coming to a lot of those readings. The way this book got started was, well, first of all, I thought I'd never write a book about the Mud Club. I didn't think it was possible to really write a book about the Mud Club. So a friend of mine said to me, she said, "Oh, you got to. This is your story. This is the story you have." She said, "But what did you used to say to people when you were standing outside?" And I thought for a moment, and I told her, and she says, "That's your first line. Now start writing." That remained the first line of the book through many drafts and many edits, and through the 5 or 6 years of writing, and the remaining 1.5 to 2 years before we got the book published. And this is the line I came up with. "If you've been standing here for more than 10 minutes, you're not getting in." I made that announcement on more than one occasion. I had to do something. No one was leaving, and no one, at least for the moment, was getting in. I looked around at what passed as Mud Club security in the summer of 1980. Moonlighting cops, gangster wannabes, and 1 or 2 guys with a little height and a few extra pounds were doing their best to keep us safe. When I started working the door in the early spring of 1979, there was a chain around the front steps, but no security at all. Just Louis and Joey, Gretchen, Robert, and Coulter. We made up the rules as we went along and handled whatever came our way. The press, weekend crowds, money, and the Hells Angels changed all that. Eventually, everything changed. I learned a lot watching Louis, like how to say no by saying nothing at all. Joey was the everyman, Gretchen was the beautiful blonde, and Robert kept things cool. Coulter ran around chasing girls and left shortly after I arrived. When the night got to be too much or not enough, when we wanted to dance or hang out in the bathrooms, we'd take turns, head inside, and get lost. It was that easy. Tonight I'm just staring at faces, and by 2 a.m. it's already too much. Aldo's standing behind me, he was one of the security guys, and Chi-Chi, that's Chi-Chi Valenti, was working the stairs to the second floor. I glance at the crowd and step inside. Chi-Chi looks at my face and says, "Oh, honey." It's the full syllable version of the "oh, hun" Cookie Mueller gave me an hour ago. It's time to disappear. I pass Boris Policeman, the legendary violinist and pool shark, who's holding up the wall near the door. He's fiddling with a transistor radio, tape recorder, or maybe it's a Geiger counter, it's hard to tell. Squeezing by, I pull my friend Edward with me and keep walking. We turn the corner and head for the basement. At the bottom of the stairs, I take a key from my pocket, we slip into the storage area, walk halfway to the elevator and stop. It's quiet and calm, except for the muffled music, the stomping feet, and the slapping sound of a security guy fucking some bridge and tunnel girl behind a stack of boxes. I pull a cut straw from my pack of Marlboros, unfold the 20 someone handed me at the door, and snort up half the half-gram of coke inside. I hand the rest over to Edward. I stare at him and smile. We're able to speak again after a minute or two and hang out for a little while more. We get in the elevator, take it for a ride, and step into another world. That other world I'll tell you about in a little bit was the second floor of the Mud Club, which you sort of had to pass, a second security level, which on different nights could be Chi-Chi Valenti or Debbie Mazar, and who was 15 at the time, and no one argued with a 15-year-old gatekeeper. But let me tell you how what it was like getting there and working there. This is about the first night on the job. My first night at the door of 77 White Street was in the cold early spring of 1979. I showed up at midnight, the club was already open and the place was busy. I stood there not sure if Steve Mass, that's the owner of the club, Steve Mass, told anyone to expect me or expected me to tell someone that I was working there. I thought, okay, I get it, but really I didn't. Joey Kelly was one of the people outside with me, and a woman named Gretchen was taking money at the door. They were the only ones who talked to me. Joey was busy handling the crowd, and she was as frazzled as anyone, and Gretchen was as frazzled as anyone would be, collecting $3 covers with a cocktail in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Gretchen was my first real friend at the Mud Club, and she was a lifesaver. A guy named Glenn McDermott seemed to be in charge of something, but I never really knew what. He stepped outside, said hello, and disappeared. I was on my own, afraid to do much of anything. I felt as I did in high school. I still didn't fit in, and I just stood there, wondering if this job was really for me. When I turned around, Meatloaf was standing behind me. He was wearing a velvet jacket and a ruffled shirt, sweating, his hair stuck to his face. Definitely not something I wanted to get close to, physically or musically. I looked away and remembered Steve Mass telling me he wanted to avoid the bloated 70s music and limo crowd. Maybe he was talking hypothetically, or maybe I just needed clarification. The loaf lingered, but I ignored it, trying not to focus on what came to be considered a prime example of two cover charge large. When Steve suggested excluding people of a certain size, I just listened and nodded, still apprenticing my role as judge and jury. I stood around, the night flew by, and the overweight singer left in a cab. I saw people I knew, people I admired, and people I wanted to know. All was a blur and left me wondering what I'd gotten myself into. At 4 a.m., I grabbed a beer and walked home. My head spinning, my ego inflating and deflating half a dozen times. Steve called me the next day and asked me to work that night. I knew I had the job if I wanted, but still wasn't sure what the job really was. Maybe I needed to open the chain and start letting people in to find out. We didn't have a velvet rope at the Mud Club. We had a chain hanging from these stanchions, and we used to either unhook the chain or just stand there with the chain in our hand. And no one was allowed to touch the chain except us. No one was allowed to come through the chain. No one was allowed to do anything with the chain. So, anyways. Now, The Mud Club wasn't your typical venue, meaning there weren't shows like at 8 o'clock or 11 o'clock. There were always, if something happened like entertainment, there was, it just happened during the course of the night. And we had a wide, the booking was really off the charts, all over the map, and we kind of did everything. This is a little about one of those performances that we booked at the Mud Club. Friends, acquaintances, and strangers, every night I witnessed a remarkable parade. Some were finding their way, some were ready to explode, and a few already had. Waiting outside, lined up at the bar, drinking or begging for a drink. The faces changed, but the parade marched on. A young, underappreciated Jean-Michel Basquiat vandalized the Mud Club bathrooms with his logo-like "Samo was here" sloganized poetics. Tossed out the door, he came back every night. The Samo stuff was all over the neighborhood. The vandalism, debatable. Artist Jeff Koons and Christopher Wool were part of the parade in the future, while musicians Johnny Thunders was the hero lost, staggering towards the door. Peter Chrome was easy to like, and if we had to throw him out, he'd apologize and get back in. Artists and writers, drunk punks and punks on dope, out of control, unavoidable, bandaged and lost. Predictably, by 2 a.m., someone was always getting the bum's rush. I opened the chain and closed it behind them. I played diplomat, depending on who was getting tossed, and let them back in if they promised to behave. I thought it was the right thing to do. Looking past Lost, I stared into Cortlandt Alley. The Mud Club was located at the intersection of Cortlandt Alley and White Street, 2 or 3 blocks below Canal, depending on which side of Broadway you were coming down. I thought about Wednesday, April 4th, and a different kind of punks on dope. I'd been working at the club just 2 weeks when Steve called me at home and asked me to come by early. I was eager and agreed. Writer Max Blagg had arranged for William S. Burroughs and poet John Giorno to do a reading that was set to start at 9 p.m. The Mud newsletter anticipated a room filled with appropriately attired Nova criminals and negotiating a $5 cover charge with the "I never paid to come in" crowd was going to keep me busy. I waited outside, hand on the chain. We were ready for the challenge. Burroughs wasn't known for his readings, but he was a legend for Naked Lunch, Junkie, Wild Boys, and the Nova Trilogy. White Street was out of the way, nighttime desolate, the Mud Club a dark set piece, weird and perfect. When Giorno finished, there was an awkward moment and a minor tussle about who'd get to do the Burroughs introduction. Finally resolved, Max introduced William to the crowd. Burroughs sat at a desk, gray metal, scratch and dent, office furniture salvage. The only thing missing was a typewriter. I remember his voice sounded proper but strange, like an old radio broadcast. He was wearing a 3-piece suit, very considered and nearly impeccable. The PA hissed, but Burroughs kept reading. I picked up my beer, I moved closer to the stage, and took a ride on the Nova Express. I mean, we did readings with people, everyone from William Burroughs to Lydia Lunch to people who were totally unknown at the time. We had music by bands we had never heard of, bands who were making their first appearance in New York, as well as legends like Marianne Faithfull and newly minted legends like the Talking Heads. So that's sort of what happened during the course of a night. Other nights just might be dancing the whole night with a DJ. I talked about the bathrooms, I mentioned them briefly earlier, and I'll tell you a little about those and that second floor that I also mentioned. When the Mud Club began, the second floor of 77 White was just a second floor. By late winter, it had become something else, and everyone wanted up there. Limited access immediately upped the ante. With an ice-filled clawfoot bathtub for a beer cooler, folding tables for a bar, and a few torn vinyl booths, the Mud's second floor was a 2,500 square foot dirty version of heaven. Artist and former whip dancing go-go boy Ronnie Catrone added a black steel cage, giving the room a touch of charm, menace, and art world edge that influenced the club's non-design and salvage decor. The second floor bathrooms were equally legend and possibly the biggest draw of all. Memorable moments barely remembered took place in those strange, brightly lit rooms. Locking the door when there was one to lock, we gathered in conversation or what passed as, drinking, pissing, doing a line, or waiting for the yet to occur. Time loses its frame, impossible to capture, but beautiful in a cinematic Super 8 kind of way. Acid trail hazy, stoned and frozen, disappearing in a white fluorescent light. The smaller bathroom, or the men's room if labels even applied, was about 8 foot square with white tiles and exposed brick, a toilet, a urinal, a sink, and a mirror. There was no partition and no privacy. The door was a bifold steel contraption with a drop lock bracer bar on the inside. It was a room built for drugs, sex, and getting lost. The ladies' room, or whatever it might have been, was more of a standard design in a public restroom kind of way. The toilets separated partitions that came and went with the seasons, the room itself more inviting and communal than the men's. There were mirrors on the wall, no lock on the door, and most of the time there was no door at all. You could freshen up, take a seat, and watch the world go by. Can everybody hear me okay? I can't tell what it's coming through. Yeah, we're all good? Okay.
Put a little closer.
Yeah, what about
Okay. Yeah, just say so. Yell it out, please. I mentioned earlier that no one was allowed to touch the chain or come through it without us opening it. There's one night where there was an exception to that rule, purely by accident, but it happened. And okay. And this is that night. Saturday, July 7th, and the big holiday came and went. I avoided the Midtown Macy's display, and the fireworks downtown were just firecracker noise. Other than that, I have no real or imagined memory of Independence Day 1979. After nearly 4 months at Mudd, I feel it's where I'm supposed to be. I'm working a job that came out of nowhere, and those springtime days seem long ago. I'm fueled by a hot dog from Dave's Luncheonette, half a dozen drinks, and as many lines of Coke. I'm prepared as I can be. My shirt's unbuttoned, unzipped, or torn, depending on what I reached for in the closet or picked up off the floor. I'm at the door and the air conditioning's still working. Everything and everybody's cool. There's maybe 100 people waiting outside when Diana Ross blows past me, the only person I ever let duck under the chain on her own. It's one fluid motion, a full-speed reverse limbo, and she does it beautifully. Studio 54 graduate and future Continental and Milk Bar owner Scotty Taylor, hanging at the door, looks over and says, "Diana Ross." I say, "Yeah," and step inside to check it out. She's already dancing with her friend, and only a few people know what's going on. The dance floor is practically in heat. Diana's in the middle, and the room can't spin any faster. I just stare, stay in the moment, and never once think of my 1966 Supremes A Go-Go album. 30 minutes pass in a wave of sweat, heat, rock and roll, and a heavy beat. Until the DJ goes Motown. The Supremes start singing, and Diana makes her way to the door. Nobody knows, but now Diana's gone. Those moments come and go, and my memory takes a jump. It's 1967, and I'm buying 45s for 69 cents. Diana is still making hits, and Mary and Flo are still singing along, until Blondie's, one way or another, picks up speed, starts bouncing around the room, and snaps me out of it. Now, I'm going to start working on another book, and it's going to be about sort of encounters that I had, and maybe many of us had, during the 60s or 70s when we were children or adolescents or teenagers or young adults. And I mention it because the Mudd Club was the kind of place where you'd meet people every night and you could fall in love with someone every night. And, you know, being at the door put me in a position where I'd meet a lot of people. And I fell in love a lot. And this is about one of those encounters. Edward is either from Long Island or the Upper East Side, maybe both. He's 17, beautiful, and still in high school. He has a vial of cocaine and a laid-back attitude, and I have a joint that Dirty Harry just gave me. We step inside, go downstairs, and get lost. It's a routine, but with him it's different. We just never have enough time. Leaning against the basement wall, I look at Edward and remember things about myself from a decade earlier. Thinking about him now makes me remember then. I was that teenage kid, looking for something and wanting more than I could handle. I do another line, Edward smiles, says nothing. 10 minutes later, we pull ourselves together, head upstairs, and he's gone. Back outside, I get hit with a blast of hot, thick air. The street smells like street. The temperature's probably 85 degrees, and the bottle of beer I just picked up at the bar is warm after a couple sips. I put it down. On the step behind me, I light a cigarette and I think about Edward. For a few brief moments, forgetting everything else. Then someone calls my name, the chain is in my hand, the crowd is still waiting. Those basement moments, still a part of me. There are some people I'll never forget, some I barely remember, and others I can't even see a memory of. I never knew their names or where they came from. They were ghosts of New York nightlife, specific to the Mud Club, White Street, and Cortlandt Alley. Some were real, and some I might have just imagined. Edward was real, and all these years past, I still wonder. I smile, I close my eyes, and I still feel my back against that basement wall. I'm still waiting for Edward. How's everybody doing, okay? We're all good? Okay, great. You know, we did get into some misadventures other than sexual misadventures. And we worked with a guy at the door named Robert Molnar. He was there at the beginning. I think he was coat checker, and then Steve Mass moved him to the door. And then a few other people came along. I think Joey was there as a security guard. Louis, my friend Louis, came along in January, I believe, and then I came along 2 months later. This is about Robert's last night at the door. Okay. Robert Molnar's Mud Club career ended right there at the door, suddenly and without warning. Depending on where you were standing and which way the fists were flying, his last night was one to either remember or forget. I'd just given up trying to negotiate when security saw what was happening. Seconds later, Robert caught a punch in the face thrown by a Hell's Angel named John the Baptist. When another angel with a hook for a hand started swinging, the situation went from 0 to chaos in seconds. Luckily for us, the hook got snagged in the front door, and Robert and I escaped out the back. We ran down Cortlandt Alley to Franklin Street, jumped in a cab on Broadway, and headed for Beekman Downtown Hospital. Robert's nose was busted, blood was everywhere, and I stayed in emergency just long enough to catch my breath and offer some sympathy, encouragement, and moral support. When I got back to the club, the crowd was still outside. The angels were inside, drinking at the downstairs bar. John the Baptist was a big, good-looking biker, a fighter and the real deal. The hook was a man of few words, with an edgier, hook for a hand kind of way about him. They both seemed nice. Once they stopped punching and swinging, and the three of us headed for the third-floor office. Baptist John had a bag of coke in his jacket and a hunting knife strapped to his belt. We sat on a table. He stacked the end of the blade with piles of white powder. I smiled and said thanks. We shared a few beers, and 10 minutes later, we all shook hands and hooks and went downstairs. I went back to the door. Robert left the emergency room, went home, and never returned. There was no reality check, just another fine line between fun and trouble. I had just turned 26, I was working, having a good time, and making new friends. Why wouldn't I snort coke off the end of a weapon held to my face by a biker named after a cousin of Jesus Christ? Let's see here. Well, okay. Now this is about the worst thing that ever happened to me. It wasn't as bad as Robert's thing. I mean, worst thing that ever happened to me physically. Emotionally, it was a roller coaster, but okay. Winter might be over, but I'm still wearing the heavy coat. You know, it's kind of late, early spring, winter that we just had that ended about a week ago. It's cold and it's Saturday night, the end of March 1980. Chi-Chi and I are both outside and Aldo's working security. From the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of a big blonde woman who used to work at the club. Built like a pro wrestler, with the soon-to-be apparent arm of a major league pitcher, she disappears in the crowd. A minute later, a dead pigeon comes flying at me, catches me off guard and hits me hard in the shoulder. I've never been hit with a dead bird before, and I nearly lose my balance. I have no idea how to react, and standing in front of 200 people doesn't help. Someone in the crowd points as the big blonde jumps in a car and drives away. It's like a scene from a rickety black and white newsreel, and for me, the moment is a total what the fuck. I look at Chi-Chi, I head inside and walk upstairs. A few people know what's happened and follow me. I'm worried my overcoat's messed up and the idea of a dead pigeon makes me sick. I pass through the second floor without looking at anyone, kick the metal door of the bathroom and go inside. I'm a few drinks and a half gram past banging my head on the wall and just short of coming undone. I feel around in my pocket for a Quaalude, bite one in half, and snort up 2 lines of coke from David the dentist. Russian Eddie lights my cigarette and shoves another blast under my nose. My friend Phoebe looks at me and flicks a feather off my shoulder. They all mean well, but I'm just not feeling it. I still can't believe it. I've been hit with a dead bird. Okay. I wanted to read this piece because it's sort of kooky, but I will. Let me see. Okay. Well, we used to sit in the basement sometimes. Sometimes we'd go in the back behind the locked door, and sometimes we'd just sit out by the coat check room. And depending on who you were with, or what kind of mood you were in, or what kind of drugs you were on, or how drunk you were, people may or may not come over and say hello, or they may avoid you, or they may just whatever. So one night I'm sitting down there with my friend Lynette and my friend Anita. And I'm relaxing with the help of a low-dose lewd. The early departures are picking up their coats at the check room, but no one bothers to come near us. Mona and Lisa, a mother-daughter team who live nearby on Duane Street, are working the coat check. And Mona's 16-year-old son, Stephen, is sitting 6 feet away, making out with my friend Terry. Lynette's talking fast and laughing, and Anita's been digging around in her bag for what seems like 10 minutes. I light a joint, pass it to Lynette, and everything seems as it should be. Near closing time, the basement's become a waiting room with everything happening and hiding in plain sight. This is another little story about one of these people who meant a lot to me. And anyway, gets into it. You know, we did a lot of drugs at the Mud Club. We just did. You know, people say, this one guy said to me, and I tell this little anecdote when I do a reading. He was a writer for, I think, he was the editor of New York Rocker, and he said to me one time that if all the cocaine consumed in this book was laid out in a single line, it would circle the globe 3 times. So whether that's truth or near truth, it's one of those. Okay. This is about starting the evening and ending the evening. I headed over to First Avenue to cop from Patrick and Melanie, a freakish but friendly couple who sold heroin to support themselves and their habit. She was tall and skinny with Sanskrit letters tattooed on her forehead. Patrick was cadaverous and burnt out. Given that, and despite the giant green iguana running around their apartment, it was still less scary than crawling through the ruins of Alphabet City. An hour later, I was back at One University Place. When I tried to leave, Jesse Chamberlain pulled me aside. Jesse Chamberlain was a friend of mine. He was a drummer. He was the son of the sculptor John Chamberlain. We got in a cab, stopped at his place a few blocks east, and ended up on White Street at 2 a.m. The Saturday crowd was backed up into the street. The temperature was stuck on a permanent 90, and the scene outside was chaos. Aldo was working security, and Gennaro was working the door. From the look of it, I was glad I had the night off. Jesse and I pushed through the crowd, grabbed Chris France and Tina Weymouth, opened the chain. Gennaro's reaction was delayed, surprised but grateful. He was in a jam, past the point of seeing faces and only seeing a crowd. People began calling my name, and I started pointing, letting them in one or two at a time. It was my job, and in some strange way, I was responsible for them. I had to step in, I just couldn't help it. When we got inside, Talking Heads' cover of Al Green's Take Me to the River was bouncing around the room, loud and heavy. The dance floor seemed caught up in a slow-motion whiplash. Jesse, waiting with 2 Budweisers, looked at me and said, "Richard to the rescue." He shoved me towards the bar. I ordered 2 more, and we walked upstairs to the bathrooms. It was nearly empty, but for 2 Russian girls nodding out, trying to put on lipstick. I smiled, said hello, and locked the door. I lit a cigarette, sucked down the first beer, and did a line of coke, and looked over at Jesse. He handed me the second beer, and we started laughing. Locked inside that little room, leaning against those dirty walls, I was still high from the First Avenue connection. The coke and beer kept me going, and Jesse kept me talking. We were hanging out in a Mud Club bathroom and on my night off, and I thought it was the right place to be. We finished the beer, and I was out of coke when one of the Russian girls tipped over. It was a nothing yet indelible moment, but it could have been me. At some point, she got up off the floor and finished putting on her makeup. Jesse and I grabbed 2 more drinks and jumped in a cab. Early morning, almost 4 a.m., we kept going. I was tired, but I couldn't stop. It was too early to just go home. I looked over at Jesse. I wanted to say something, to tell me, I wanted him to say something, to tell me where he was going and what he was looking for. Maybe he was waiting for me to do the same. I wish I could ask Jesse if he remembers anything, any of this. I wish he was still here. Okay, I'm going to read one short little passage and then the finale, as I call it. So, I love the title of this. Besides reading it, I have to read the title. The title of this little section is called Almost Fucking. Okay, nearly 3 weeks into September, the never knowing what's next ride continued. Barely 27, I continued flirting with heroin, but by now, the heroin was flirting back. Still, something was always missing and my balance was always off. I wasn't sure if it was just me wondering what was going on, or whether everyone else was walking the same fine line. It was hard to tell the difference between moving forward and moving closer to the edge. Chain in hand, I just kept sending people through the door. 10 minutes later, I found myself leaning on the sink in the second-floor bathroom. There were 6 other people inside. 2 were up against the wall, almost fucking, and everybody else was getting high. I lit a cigarette, and fond memories of all the toilets in town came flooding back. When someone passed me a vial of coke, I dumped a pile on my fist and snorted it up in one blast. When the top of my head settled down, I looked around and said thanks to no one in particular. I leave Mud and cab it over to Late Street. Late Street was this after-hours joint called Late Street, on Late Street. Sturgis is spinning records. A woman named Christie's behind the bar, and Marcia Resnick standing in front of it. Nita Pallenberg is in the back, and John Belushi is on his way out. I have nearly a gram of coke wrapped up in a 50, and I'm not sure where it came from. Coked up and frozen, drifting through the blue haze of cigarette smoke, I'm wishing for a speedball. Maybe 24 people are in the place, and everybody looks easy. At this hour or any, bad behavior has little meaning. With few boundaries other than messing with the Hells Angels, I hit on a security guy from the Ritz. Dumb and wasted, long dark hair, and beautiful in the right light. He's got Bensonhurst or Bay Ridge written all over him. I walk over, mumble in his ear for 30 seconds, and he follows me out the door. The next time I look at the clock, it's noon, and I'm lying on my living room floor, the 50s wiped clean lying on the kitchen table. Bensonhurst is in the shower. The speedball wish never came true. 10 hours of crash time later, I'm back at 77 White. All right. I'm going to just finish up, read this little piece, and then if anybody has any questions about the book, please feel free, or about the Mud Club, or about anything, please feel free. I know my life would be different if I hadn't seen the poster with the address 77 White. I'd be a different person if I hadn't followed that winding road and eventually hit that brick wall. 30-odd years after the Mud Club closed, I still see the crowd waiting outside. I see myself running around the second floor, hiding out in the bathroom, and jumping around on the dance floor. I still remember how the place felt like home the first time I walked through the door. The moment seems brief, but for a few short years, 77 White Street was the heartbeat and the heart of the scene. Today I'll hear a song and remember where I've been. I'll hear another song and think about where I'm going. I open a box of old photographs and some things look familiar. Other things don't even seem real. A few of the pictures make me feel older and younger at once. I'll recognize my family and friends, but sometimes it's hard to recognize myself. That's when I turn down the music, look away, and try to move forward. Other times I close my eyes and try to sleep. And thank you all very much for being here. Thank you very much, really. So does anyone have any questions? Yes.
First of all, I loved your book.
Thank you.
The level of detail is so amazing. I'm just wondering how you were able to remember all that. No one knows. And did you keep a journal, or?
No, I kept some journals, and I kept some notes, and I kept a lot of ephemera, and I interviewed 200 people for this book. And over the course of those interviews, it turns into a kind of thing where you'll say to people, someone will say something to you and you'll go, oh shit, I never would have remembered that. And then that opens up a door in memory that brings out all these details of episodes that you had never thought about in years. Or you may say the same thing to them, and one word you might say may also do the same, trigger something in them, and they'll go, oh, I forgot all about that. I can't believe that. You were there that night, or I was there that night. And so that's how it really worked. And a lot of the details I just know, I just remembered. It was a very important part of my life. It was a very meaningful part of my life.
But isn't part of that also, Richard, that you were a painter, an art painter, and the visual
Yes,
capacity?
exactly. The visuals are important to me because I've been a visual artist for all these years. So absolutely, that's true. Yes. Yes.
I was curious who you encountered in your research for the book that most surprised you, or that you didn't think you would encounter, and who that person was.
Well, it's odd. A lot of, and I say this in a loving way, a lot of the usual suspects came through and were very generous with what they had to offer, either via memory or photographs or whatever. As far as people who surprised me, who I encountered, to give an example, which is sort of out of left field but not, there was a musician named Bernie Worrell, and he was the musical director for Parliament Funkadelic, and he also played for the Brides of Funkenstein, and he also was part of the Talking Heads big band in there from like 1980 forward. And he was very difficult to get a hold of. And he had to go through his wife, who was sort of the gatekeeper. But I finally got a hold of him. First, she called me back, and then she told me when to call Bernie, and I called Bernie. Bernie was this sweet guy. He was probably 75 when I talked to him. And he told me this story about meeting George Clinton in a barbershop in Passaic, New Jersey. And he referred to that barbershop as the heart of the scene. And that was the same feeling I had about the Mud Club. And this was a guy, this was a legendary black musician who I had never really known well, but shook his hand and knew him from the clubs and knew him from backstage episodes or encounters. And he turned out to be one of the best interviews I did, and just the sweetest guy. And so things like that did happen. Yes.
Are you still going out? Are you still clubbing? It's Richard, right?
That's a good question. Thank you for asking.
You're very welcome.
Actually, I'm doing these events at the Soho Grand on the last Tuesday of every month. And they've been a lot of fun. We have different guest DJs every month, sort of legendary DJs. The next one is, let's see, a week from Tuesday, April 24th. And the DJs that night are Fab Five Freddy and Danny Johnson from Club 57. She's going to spin for the first 2 hours, and Fab is going to spin from 10 to 1. They're early evenings, well, sort of early evenings. They're from 8 to 1, and there's no cover. So please come by. You'll see postings for these. There is a Mud Club Book Instagram page and a Mud Club Book Facebook page. And you'll see postings for any of the readings or club nights that I'm doing. But other than that, unless there's a band playing that I want to see, or someone doing a reading, or going to an art show, an opening, I don't really go out to events very much anymore. Or I don't go out.
Is there a Jane out front?
There isn't, but we do have a doorman, and his name is, I'm losing my voice. His name is Jonas, and he's very nice.
He lets everyone in.
He'll let everybody in. He's not like me. So come there with no fear, please. Yes.
I know you worked on a book about her, but I'm wondering if you had any particularly interesting story about Gia Karanji.
Well, that was in my book. I was just interviewed. Gia used to come to the Mud Club, and she was young then. And she used to come with her girlfriend, Sandy. And, you know, like everybody else, everybody was using drugs at the time. So they, you know, they hung out in the bathroom a lot. They went from the dance floor to the bar to the bathroom and back. And that was the routine, like pretty much everybody who hung out there. And like I said, she was young. She was young, pretty, she was a star, and she was very unassuming. So that's really, there's a few anecdotes about her in the book, brief ones. That book was written, and I know it just was released in a Spanish language edition, the Gia Karanji book. I don't really have a copy of it even. And I was interviewed over the phone from Italy by this woman who wrote it. So I don't really know much more than that about the book. Everybody good? Any other? Yes.
I look at New York now as so much different, from 30 years prior. Do you see New York, the possibility of New York going in a direction where there's such a creative bubble, where possibilities are endless? Because now New York, as a reluctantly hopeful New Yorker, I can't help but think it just feels so synthetic now, as opposed to 30, 40 years ago where it was a force, almost like a muscle. I'm hopeful that there will be community spots like the Mud Club, like Eighties, etc. But I don't know. Do you look at it now compared to 30, 40 years ago and see obviously progress isn't perfection in any way?
I think what we see today is, or at least for me, there's a community in spirit and a community in people's hearts, whether they live full-time in the city or are able to find a place to live in the city. But there's still a collective creative endeavor that's trying to move things forward. New York is a difficult place to move into now. When I moved to New York, I was able to move into an apartment share a one-bedroom for $175 a month on Bleecker Street. And, you know, when I got my loft in 1977, that was a big raw space in Tribeca that I held on to for nearly 30 years. And, but I think people being priced out of New York eliminates the possibility of these places, like you mentioned, the Mud Club or CBGB's or even Max's, because people aren't in walking distance to go to those places. It's not, there's no longer that I never go above 14th Street kind of spirit. You have to go all over the place. You know what? You have to go to Brooklyn. I mean, and even Brooklyn is, people are being priced out of Brooklyn. People are being priced out of the far reaches of Brooklyn, like Ridgewood. So, you know, it's that makes things different. But I think the spirit and the desire to be part of, you know, to be part of that creative energy is still intact. Yes?
Part of the reason of being Soho in the 70s and 80s is where the artists lived. It was cheap, okay? And we didn't want to go up to Studio 54, which is why we went to the Mud Club.
Very true.
We wouldn't be seen dead in Studio 54. And one of the things that killed the Mud Club is that 54 people started coming down.
Well, I think in 1983, I think, and that's why I sort of timed in my book, I think in 1983 things began to change, especially real estate wise.
Right.
And I think that's when the beginning of people starting to get priced out started to happen. Yes?
We had a thing where we did a reading for the Gertrude Stein New Year's weekend, and all the artists in Soho came, and we read for 72 hours, right? It was at the Paul Cooper Gallery, south of Hudson Street, Ulster, and it was just organic, you know? Now you have to go to Berlin for that.
You do. Does anybody else have a question? Yes.
No, I just a comment and so much a question. Just, I mean, you captured, and I'm so grateful that you wrote the book because life was art in those days,
It was
and
very,
a lot of play, and there was room, like you said, there was room to do that. You know, and people were doing performance on roofs, and they were, I mean, just amazing. It was an amazing time, and I'm grateful for you to have captured it because. I cannot believe how authentic you have brought it back. I haven't been here, like I'm actually the first night back after almost 25 years I used to live here. And it's like a walk back in time, and you captured something that is what I would say is a cultural icon. Because New York City is so authentic. It is New York City. But times go on, and then you nailed it. You just really nailed it in this book. It's beautiful, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We have books for sale in the back, and please see Greg if you'd like a book. And if you want to bring that book up to me to sign, I'll be happy to sign your books for you.